Welcome to the Introduction module of the Works Clearinghouse Group Design Standards Training. This module serves as an introduction to the Works Clearinghouse, or WWC, Group Design Standards, as well as some core concepts that apply to all reviews. This module provides an overview of important logistics and key resources referenced in the WWC Group Design Standards Training Series. You can access all the resources mentioned in this module through the WWC's website, whatworks.ed.gov. The Works Clearinghouse, or WWC, is an initiative of the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. It was founded in 2002 by the Office of Educational Research and Innovation at the Department of Education to help schools, districts, and states identify scientifically based research as was required by the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. Later that year, Congress passed the Education Sciences Reform Act that created the Institute of Education Sciences, which took over responsibility for the WWC. The purpose of the WWC is to review and summarize the existing rigorous research on education interventions. We define interventions as any educational program, product, practice, or policy aimed at improving student outcomes. For instance, an intervention might be a math curriculum, an after-school program, the use of educational software, or an instructional practice for teaching reading. When reviewing education research, the WWC uses a common set of procedures and standards, the WWC Procedures and Standards Handbook, to guide our work. The WWC developed these standards because there's a substantial amount of research on education interventions, but the quality of that research varies. At the time of the WWC's inception, there were no common rules or guidelines for researchers to follow when developing their education research studies. Summaries of studies often differ, so synthesizing or comparing findings across the studies is not simple. The WWC standards provide a set of common guidelines to help the public decipher the information from different studies with different findings, which can be difficult to do. This allows the WWC to be consistent and transparent in our efforts. The WWC continues to refine its procedures and standards over time. This training focuses on the most frequently used set of WWC standards called the Group Design Standards. When we apply the Group Design Standards, we focus on effectiveness research, namely, research studies that try to determine whether an intervention caused an improvement in student or teacher outcomes. We do this to provide educators and decision-makers with information to make evidence-based decisions. When we apply the Group Design Standards, we focus on effectiveness research, namely, research studies that try to determine whether an intervention caused an improvement in student or teacher outcomes. We do this to provide educators and decision-makers with information to make evidence-based decisions. The WWC offers this training series to inform the public about our design standards, to increase the transparency of our review process, and to promote the use of rigorous educational research. The purpose of this training is to describe and explain key elements in the WWC's Group Design Standards and how the WWC uses those standards to identify high-quality, rigorous research. Each module in this training series focuses on a different aspect of the Group Design Standards. The training series also describes the procedures the WWC uses to review studies and describes how the WWC reports findings from studies. Finally, the training series will prepare those who are interested in pursuing the optional Group Design certification process. This training is free and open to the public for anyone interested in the WWC's procedures and standards. However, it might not be right for everyone who is interested in learning more about the Works Clearinghouse. Although this training will go into depth on the WWC group design standards, it is not a comprehensive training on research methods or group designs more generally. Most trainees who go on to become certified have a graduate degree that includes a background in quantitative research methods. The training will reference many research concepts, but will only discuss them in the context of the WWC standards. Without prior training in research methods, some parts of the training may be difficult to follow. For members of the public who are interested in learning more about the WWC in general, but may not be as interested in an in-depth understanding of the WWC's procedures and standards, the WWC resources page contains links to many helpful products, such as the linked video on using the WWC website to find evidence-based programs and practices. Let us now move to an overview of the WWC's reviews, who is involved in the review process, and discuss some of the major changes in the most recent version of the handbooks. Given the vast amount of research literature on education interventions, the WWC must prioritize topics for its systematic reviews and reviews of individual studies. Thus, in order to be reviewed by the WWC, studies must be publicly available and must be eligible for WWC review under the parameters specified in the current version of the study review protocol. Because the WWC considers recent studies to be more relevant to decision makers than older studies, studies over 20 years old are ineligible for WWC review. When conducting systematic reviews of research for WWC evidence synthesis products, such as practice guides and intervention reports, the WWC will prioritize topics using a range of considerations, which include but are not limited to considerations such as legislative relevance, relevance to education decision makers, the availability of evidence, and the need for an up-to-date synthesis. Appendix A of the WWC Procedures and Standards Handbook provides greater detail on the WWC's principles for prioritizing and searching for studies to review. Individual study reviews are the ingredients for practice guides and intervention reports and can help support evidence-based decision-making. The primary audience for WWC reviews of individual studies include potential grantees, curriculum and intervention developers, and researchers. The WWC also publishes intervention reports, a type of evidence synthesis product. Using a systematic review process, WWC intervention reports summarize all of the rigorous evidence on a specific intervention in order to support evidence-based decision-making. The primary audience for WWC intervention reports are state, district, and school administrators, curriculum and intervention developers, researchers, and instructional leaders such as teacher instructional coaches. The WWC also publishes practice guides, another type of evidence synthesis product. WWC practice guides are designed to help educators address classroom challenges by offering concrete suggestions and summarizing the evidence base associated with the suggested practices. The primary audience for practice guides is teachers as well as other educators, such as state, district, and school administrators, or teacher instructional coaches, and professional development providers. The WWC aims to translate research evidence into accurate, accessible, and useful information for educators. This requires collaboration across individuals in multiple roles. This includes WWC reviewers, who are the backbone of the WWC. Reviewers are responsible for reviewing and interpreting research and extracting or developing information for presentation on the WWC website. A typical WWC reviewer has a graduate degree in education or the social sciences, has a strong background in educational research methodology and demonstrates a willingness to pay attention to small study details. WWC certified reviewers ensure that each reviewed study receives fair and equitable treatment under the WWC standards. Content experts also play a critical role in the work of the WWC. Content experts provide advice on topic area protocols and may nominate evidence-based interventions for consideration for inclusion in intervention reports. Content experts also play an important role in practice guide products, recommending evidence-based practices and how to put those practices in place in the classroom. Methodologists also play an important role in the WWC review process. Methodologists often serve as reviewers for the WWC, but they also may help sometimes serve as content area experts when collaborating on topic area protocols for intervention reports. They may also help identify relevant research, screen studies for inclusion in WWC reviews, and ensure that the WWC uses the best possible standards and evidence. IES leadership also may play an essential role in the WWC review process. IES staff help set the direction and expectations of quality for WWC products. They also ensure that WWC resources are designed for a range of users and ensure that resources are disseminated effectively and efficiently. IES staff work closely with content contractors who develop and disseminate WWC products. As we discussed earlier, individual study reviews are the basis for all WWC products. The WWC follows a review process that is consistent, objective, and follows transparent procedures and standards. Namely, all WWC study reviews are conducted using the Works Clearinghouse Procedures and Standards Handbook, version 5.0, and the WWC uses the study review protocol to review individual studies as well as studies reviewed as part of evidence synthesis products. The WWC's review process consists of 3 phases as shown here. The first phase in the process involves screening studies for eligibility. The eligibility criteria used for screening studies include whether the study used an eligible design, was published in an eligible time frame, included an eligible sample, included an eligible outcome measure, was conducted in an eligible location, and whether the study met any other relevant criteria. The second phase in the WWC study review process is to review study findings according to WWC standards. At this stage, eligible findings from studies are assessed according to WWC standards. The WWC examines several features to determine whether the study's findings can be attributed to the intervention. This phase carries considerable weight in the review process because it is at this stage that the WWC makes consequential decisions about the study that will affect the research ratings of the findings. The third and final phase of the WWC study review process is to synthesize and report results. At this stage, the WWC synthesizes and reports on 2 main sets of results. First are research ratings, which are based on the strength of the study's research design and its execution. And second are effectiveness ratings, which are based on the evidence of favorable effects from the intervention. So what exactly are the WWC standards? These standards provide a common framework to assess the credibility of research evidence on the effectiveness of interventions. The WWC standards are sets of criteria used to assess research and to assign a rating that reflects the internal validity of the study findings, or in other words, whether the study provides credible evidence of the effect of the intervention on study participants. The WWC has different standards for reviewing evidence from studies that use group designs, advanced group designs such as regression discontinuity designs, and single case designs. The goal of all of these standards is to identify high-quality research in a transparent and objective way. Upon reviewing an eligible study against the standards, the WWC assigns one of 3 research ratings to the study findings. Research ratings are focused primarily on study quality. Then the WWC will summarize these findings in different WWC publications and products, such as the intervention reports and practice guides we mentioned earlier. The WWC will also assign studies, interventions, and practices effectiveness ratings. Effectiveness ratings are different from research ratings in that they include study quality information, but also consider additional contextual factors. The 3 research ratings that the WWC may apply to study findings include meets WWC standards without reservations, meets WWC standards with reservations, or does not meet WWC standards. This table provides a brief description of the 3 different types of research ratings the WWC will assign to study findings during a review. Each module in this training series will walk you through a different part of the criteria used to obtain these research ratings, so you will see these research ratings mentioned repeatedly throughout the training series. For those studies with findings rated meets WWC standards without reservations, or meets WWC standards with reservations, the WWC will then synthesize and report the corresponding findings to characterize the effectiveness of the intervention by outcome domain. To do this, the WWC uses evidence definitions from the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, together with the U.S. Department of Education's General Administrative Regulations to assess favorable effects from an intervention. These assessments take into account sample size, multiple settings, the statistical significance of study findings, and the absence of overriding negative effects. How the WWC determines effectiveness ratings does differ slightly across the different types of products offered by the WWC, which we discuss in greater detail in the next module. Before proceeding, it is important to acknowledge a few major changes that occurred under the newest version of the WWC Procedures and Standards, version 5.0. This may be particularly informative for people who were certified reviewers under previous versions of the WWC Procedures and Standards. Under previous versions of the WWC Procedures and Standards, the WWC handbooks allowed topic area review teams to customize certain aspects of the standards. Now, under version 5.0, the WWC no longer allows for topic-specific customization of the standards. However, some choices are now allowed to vary at the study level. We will discuss some of these choices in later modules. Another major change under version 5.0 is that all WWC study reviews are now conducted according to the WWC Procedures and Standards Handbook and guided by the Study Review Protocol. The Study Review Protocol is used in reviews cited as evidence for U.S. Department of Education grant competitions, studies that were funded by the department, and studies identified for systematic reviews of evidence based on a search of the research literature in a particular topic area. This change to a single review protocol was made to increase review consistency, transparency, and efficiency. Topic area synthesis protocols will continue to be used under version 5.0, but they now are only used to provide topic area specific guidance for literature search, prioritization of studies, and intervention, sample, and outcome eligibility criteria for the synthesis. As we just described, another major change under version 5.0 of the WWC Procedures and Standards is that the WWC has now aligned its effectiveness ratings with U.S. Department of Education evidence definitions for individual studies and synthesis products. These effectiveness ratings will be discussed at length later in this training series. The WWC modified its effectiveness ratings to include those evidence definitions in order to streamline the identification of effective interventions. Finally, under version 5.0, the WWC now determines effectiveness ratings at the outcome domain level. So in other words, if a study has multiple main findings in the same outcome domain, the WWC now creates a composite finding and reports the effectiveness rating for the domain level composite. The WWC made this change under the new standards because a synthesis of multiple findings in the same domain will tend to provide a better representation of the underlying construct than will any single measurement. An additional benefit to this change is that it has also simplified WWC procedures by eliminating the need for multiple comparison corrections, which were applied prior to 5.0. Other notable changes under version 5.0 include a new procedure that allows the WWC's effectiveness ratings for individual study reviews, but not research ratings, to be based on the outcome measures that are independent of intervention developers and study authors. This change in procedure reflects the WWC's concern that potentially meaningful differences in effect sizes can be obtained from measures created by interventions or study authors, and these measures may not be as informative to policymakers and practitioners as independent measures. As described later in the training series, the study review protocol identifies outcome domains for which the WWC will use independent measures to assess effectiveness. Under version 5.0 of the study review protocol, the domains which the WWC assesses measures independence are all math and literacy-related domains. It is important to note that studies that use non-independent measures can still meet WWC standards. Non-independent measures can contribute to a cross-study synthesis when the need for non-independent measures is documented in the topic area review protocol. However, non-independent measures will not contribute to effectiveness ratings in individual study reviews. Another notable change under the new standards is that high attrition randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, as well as regression discontinuity design studies, no longer need to demonstrate baseline equivalence to be rated meets WWC standards with reservations when attrition bias is assessed using the optimistic boundary. Rather, authors of these types of studies only need to use an acceptable adjustment strategy. This change in the standards is discussed in greater detail later in the training series. Additional notable changes under version 5.0 include that the WWC no longer considers bundled or combined interventions to be a confounding factor in reviews of individual studies, because a bundled intervention can produce a valid impact estimate for the package of interventions if that package is eligible for WWC review. For a WWC synthesis product, a bundled intervention will remain problematic if any of the bundled interventions do not meet the definition of intervention eligibility as articulated in the topic area synthesis protocol. And under this circumstance, a bundled intervention may be excluded from a synthesis product. Under version 5.0, the WWC also now classifies cluster designs as having either a low or high risk of bias due to compositional change from joiners. This change eliminates a prior distinction between late versus early joiners, and the standards now provide explicit guidance about when including joiners in the analytic sample should not affect the study's research rating. Under version 5.0, the WWC also now allows cluster designs to have different risks of compositional change at different levels. Namely, reviewers can now use optimistic or cautious attrition boundary thresholds when assessing individual level attrition, cluster level attrition, and cluster representativeness. Finally, under version 5.0, the WWC has made several additional changes to its single case design standards. Those changes are not described here, but are instead discussed at length in the WWC's Single Case Design Standards Training Series.